Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you all on this call to talk about Dr. Abel's story through his cybersecurity nightmare, for lack of a better word. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day. We know that this virtual learning is tough for everybody now, and everybody is busy and has things to be doing. So we really appreciate your time and you making the effort to be here today. So we've got Bryan Currier here from Advantage Technologies. We've got Gary Salman from Black Talon Security, and then our special guest, Dr. Jared Abel. So without further ado, Gary Salman, as CEO and co-founder of Black Talon Security. Gary is dedicated to data security and understanding the latest trends in the industry, particularly as they relate to small to medium businesses. He has a proven executive management track record and over 30 years of experience in software development, computer IT, and developed one of the very first cloud-based healthcare systems. In addition, Gary has over 15 years as an instructor at West Point, and he is also involved in law enforcement. So welcome, Gary. It's wonderful to have you here. Bryan Currier from Advantage Technologies. In 2000, he started Advantage Technologies in his parents' basement with the goal of bringing hassle-free IT to his clients. 20 plus years later, Bryan and his team of nearly 90 people are doing just that. Bryan is a recognized expert and in-demand speaker on the topics of technology design, management, and cybersecurity. Bryan believes that the effective use of technology is the great equalizer, helping small businesses compete against their big business counterparts, and loves seeing entrepreneurial businesses win. So welcome, Bryan.
Thank you, Laura.
So I want to start off a little bit about talking about what Black Talon does, what Advantage Technologies does. There sometimes is some overlap in the two offerings. And so I would kind of like to talk a little bit about what that looks like, what the partnership between Black Talon and Advantage Technologies looks like. Bryan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. It's a common question because when we talk with some of our clients about Black Talon, they'll be like, well, don't we have you guys handle our cybersecurity? And the answer is yes and no. Right. So for some practices, we have base level cybersecurity built into every one of our IT management plans. So things like firewalls, managed switches, backups, and all of those day-to-day things that every practice needs, we build that in. For some practices, you really need to take it a step beyond that. You need to look at advanced cybersecurity tools. And there are some IT companies out there that will say, oh yeah, we offer that as well. We've chosen not to do that. We've chosen to partner with Black Talon for a couple of reasons. Number one, we want somebody to audit our systems. So every year, Black Talon comes in and basically tears our IT system apart, puts it back together again and says, here's what we found, here's what you need to correct. And then we work with them monthly. And that's really to protect our clients, because if they get through me, they're going to get to you. So it's really important that we do that. And the second thing is, I can't peer review my own work. Right, so it's kind of like an IT company that says, oh yeah, we do all our own security audits. Really? Well, isn't that kind of just saying that, hey, we do a good job? No, really believe us, we do a good job? So for me, there's a bit of an integrity issue there. So we've chosen to partner with Black Talon Security with us as an IT company to check our systems and to make sure that we're doing everything we need to do to protect your information. And when a client meets the profile that we discuss with them, and it's like, hey, you need to look at some advanced cybersecurity tools, Black Talon is who we choose to use for that. So there's a bit of an overlap, but there's the baseline that everybody needs to have. And then there's advanced cybersecurity that situationally can be very appropriate. And we've chosen to partner with Black Talon because we believe they're best of breed. So that's probably the quickest explanation I can give for that, Laura.
Thank you. Gary, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think he summarized it really well. So I'll pass my time to Dr. Abel.
You let it stand. Okay. So Dr. Abel, thank you again so much for joining us. Dr. Jared Abel is a practice owner of a very successful, busy oral surgery practice in Bethesda. Chevy Chase Oral Surgery is the name of the company, Chevy Chase, Maryland, with extensive experience in orthognathic, facial trauma, cosmetic surgery, and facial reconstruction. He's been named one of the top 2019 dentists and belongs to numerous prestigious associations and societies. He also has a desire to teach others through his cybersecurity or cyber attack experience. So welcome, Dr. Abel.
Thank you for having me.
So,
Thank you for that
yep.
intro. Yeah, so getting into the experience that I had, which is very unfortunate. It all started actually the way that I even found out about it. I have two practices, or I have one practice, two locations, one in Chevy Chase, Maryland, one in DC. And I got a text message for one of my classmates from dental school asking me if I used a certain unnamed, not to be named IT company. And I said, oh, I certainly do. And she said, is everything okay? You know, was any of your data stolen? And I'm like, wait, how do you know about this? So apparently somebody in a Facebook group had posted, you know, I use this IT company, you know, I've been hacked and this and that. And so I went on that Facebook page and saw that post, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is my IT company. So I called up the head of that company and asked, you know, if this was true. And he said, yes, unfortunately it is. And then, you know, at that point, my head just started spinning. I didn't know even where to begin. So I rushed to my Chevy Chase office and just kind of did some snooping around and actually had the head of the IT company on the phone, asking him to walk me through how to, you know, figure out if something has happened to my office. And then sure enough, we did some snooping around and found out that it had. And so walking back on how it even happened, now certainly Gary will be able to give more details, but the IT company itself was hacked. So it wasn't just the individual clients that were targeted on their own. The IT company was targeted, and through their remote connections kind of branched out like tentacles to a majority of their clients. And unfortunately, I was one of them. Chance would have it that I actually got an email that day promoting, not saying that Gary had done this on his own, he's the one who asked me, and so now he's going to have to call me, but I got an email promoting Black Talon, and then it just, like, you know, kind of rang a bell for me, because I knew Gary from the past when he worked with CareStream, because I use the software WinOMS through CareStream, and then I knew that Gary was involved with the cybersecurity company because I saw him at all the dental meetings, international meetings, and not to go too much on a tangent, but I distinctly remember multiple conversations with Gary at those meetings where he would ask me how things were going and ask me if I had a cybersecurity company, if I was worried about my cybersecurity. And my answer to him every time was like, I got my IT company. They got me covered, because that's what they told me, just like Bryan had alluded to. They take care of my cybersecurity, my backups and everything. So I'm the type of person who does a lot of due diligence in figuring out who's going to be working with me and for me, to make sure that we have a very strong, cohesive team, and that I can delegate a lot of responsibilities that I'm not as familiar with. And of course, IT is something I wasn't as familiar with, and I did what I thought was my due diligence in picking this IT company, and I thought that was enough. And it turns out that certainly was not the case. So after I got that email, I had Gary's cell, so I texted him and, you know, said, hey, what do you guys do again? Because I think I need you. Gary was very responsive and very quickly got the ball rolling to get us to figure out what had happened and what to do from there. So they didn't, the attackers, the bad players didn't just steal all of our data. What they had done is encrypted a bunch of our files that rendered our software more difficult to use, if not impossible to use. They were demanding a ransomware, so a ransom. And so Gary helped with coordinating on what was needed, what needed to be done, timelines, and gave me the expectations on how this is going to play out, and just kind of walked me through all of this. The only silver lining to all this is that it happened during COVID. Because at first I was like, gosh, first this plague and now this, I can't deal with this. But the silver lining was we were not running to full capacity at the time. This is when we're just doing emergencies only. So thankfully I had time to actually take care of this, because usually I hardly have time to eat. So that was the only silver lining there. We were back up and running through Gary and Black Talon's efforts in just under a week. It was about 5 days, I think. It turned out that we did negotiate to pay the ransom for one of our offices. And then through investigation, we found out our DC office actually had a shadow server that they missed. So we were able to actually get that up and running without having to pay that ransom. Fortunately, I was covered and am covered for cybersecurity attacks through a bunch of my different insurances. But that being said, you know, that wasn't to me, the worst part, now it's certainly, again, because it was COVID, I wasn't losing as much income because we weren't doing as much volume, but the business interruption. So if this happens, aside from having to pay ransomware, which is significant, if my practice is down for a week or two, that is beyond significant and very hard to recoup. And so that, from a financial business standpoint, is hard to recover from, as well as just the mental stress in dealing with all this, because aside from getting my practice up and running again, I did also have to be concerned about, did they steal data? So now we have, HIPAA concerns and other concerns beyond of just trying to get our practice software back up and running. We're worried about, patients' information and everything else, which is a whole different ballgame. Now, fortunately for us, through the investigations, we found that none of it was stolen. It was just encrypted. These bad players just wanted their money, and that was it. So certainly in hindsight, hindsight being 2020, pun intended, because we're in 2020. So in hindsight, I certainly wish that I had a company like Black Talon prior to this event, but now I'm definitely utilizing Black Talon services, because more than anything, I want to do everything in my power to keep this from happening again, to go through the heartache, the stress, the interruption to our practice. That's something I just can't really afford with how we flow. And I know most people in private practices similar to mine, or practices that are growing, or just anywhere where you are in your practice development, this is something that is the last thing that you want to have happen. And it's a big violation too. You feel kind of violated. I have many victims in my practice, all my patients that I have to assault with oral surgery, and now I'm a victim to this. I guess it's full circle. What are you going to do? But kind of the way that I equate this, as far as like just having an IT company, and like Bryan had alluded to, and feel like you're safe and everything else, I have the security measures in place. We all know what this is, and you feel like you're wearing it and you're protecting yourself, but if you don't have the cybersecurity protection on top of it, you're basically doing this. It's like I'm wearing it, but it's not really doing anything it's supposed to do, and you're just kind of turning a blind eye. So that's it for the puns and the metaphors and everything. But that's kind of my story, and I'm just thankful that there was some support other than me just trying to figure this out on my own and just talking to my insurance companies. Because if I had just done that based off their recommendations, this would have been drawn out many weeks. They didn't want me to do like anything until they approved it and everything else. And Gary and Black Talon helped to show me the way and how to get through it and get back up and running and protect myself. And so that's where I'm now, and we're back, where we were, doing the things that we were doing before, and thankful that it wasn't worse than it was.
Right. Yeah.
So can I ask a couple of things here real quick?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the 2020 thing, that's something that my 15-year-old daughter would roll her eyes and credit me with a dad joke. So congratulations.
I got lots of those.
You're starting early on those.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, just for the fun of everybody, Dr. Abel, we're glad to have him on this, but he's not an Advantage Tech client. So for all the Advantage Tech clients on here thinking, oh my God, they really did Advantage Tech have a data breach? No, we're talking about all the reasons we don't do that. But I'm curious, did you guys find out how much the insurance company actually paid for the ransom for your data?
Oh yeah, so for each location, they were asking for $37,500. So we paid it for the Chevy Chase location, and we did not pay it for the DC location. We got back up and running without it. Yeah, but thankfully, none of that came out of my pocket because of my insurances, but I did have deductibles that I had to take care of, and then I had to kind of hound my ex-IT company to help with some of that. So that's a different story.
Okay.
Great. Yeah. And Bryan, in this attack, it was basically about $37,000 per server. So we had some multi-office practices. Dr. Abel's network was a little different, but we had victims who had 3, 4 locations. They had a server in each location with data like pans, periapicals, cone beam. They had to pay about $30-ish thousand per office. So we had some practices that had to dole out over $100,000 just in ransom payments.
Wow.
So yeah, we had one GP practice that paid $120,000. So yeah, it's very unfortunate. And this attack was on, just kind of like helping everyone understand, this was on the lower end in terms of the complexity of the attack. Yes, they did get into the IT vendor. I'm not saying that's not a complex issue, but they did not strike every single computer. In many of these attacks, we walk into finding the practice has every single computer fully encrypted with ransomware. And then what happens is typically those price tags go up as well, because it's often that you have stuff on computers like, oh my gosh, I forgot I have these files, I can't lose them, I need them back. And all of a sudden that price tag goes up significantly because you're paying for multiple computers to be recovered. So, and the other thing that the practices should know is, Dr. Abel had multiple backups. He had a server, he had a cloud backup, he had a local backup, and because of a vulnerability on his backup device, actually it just became public last week, Dr. Abel, believe it or not. Remember the vulnerability we discovered on your backup drives? That just made it public months later, that the manufacturer fixed a vulnerability on his backup drive. So the threat actors gained access to his backup drive and erased everything on the backup. So, a lot of people are like, why would you pay the ransom? You should have a backup. We have to understand that these are sophisticated operations in most cases, and their goal is to find your backups and take them out. That's why, Bryan and us work hard to make sure they don't get in your system to begin with. And that's the key, right? You have to do everything you can to just keep them out of your system. You can put all the cool defensive measures in place on the inside, but once they're in, they're in. And look at what the hospitals, you think hospitals don't spend a ton of money on, this type of technology? They do, but they have a lot of entry points, unlike, a practice, and you can help really lock, a practice down much better than a hospital with 10,000 computers. So, that was definitely a challenge. And there were practices in Dr. Abel's area, right, that were serviced by this IT vendor. They were down for 4 weeks. We got calls weeks after Dr. Abel was up and be like, oh, we got, your name from one of your clients. Can you help us? We're still down. I don't even know how to describe it. It's horrible. It's very sad to see what happens, because Dr. Abel said it well. The emotional impact, I see it all the time, it's devastating, because people are watching their entire business kind of evaporate right in front of them, and you don't know, am I going to get my data back? Did they steal the data? And he got lucky because they did not steal the data, but I can tell you now that is the typical modus operandi.
That's the new thing.
Yeah, that's the new thing. Because if they steal your data, I would say you're 100% going to pay, right? Most of the practices pay anyway to recover the data. We have had a couple of practices like, I don't care, I'll lose all my patient data, but I'm not paying that money, and they don't understand the long-term ramifications of that decision. But now, if you find out your data is about to be published or is partially published on the dark web, you're going to pay 100% to make sure that data is pulled down. So that's the sad thing that's happening right now. And FBI just announced healthcare is the #1 target. So that's, we're all in it together.
Since our incident, and I already sent you one notice, Gary. We've had 2 different hospitals in our area get hit. I don't know to what extent, but we got notices, from those 2 different hospital systems, not just, I think, one facility, like the entire system that was hit.
So one of the things that I do when I do my presentation on cybersecurity is I have this slide at the very beginning, and it's like something out of Nat Geo channel, right? You've got all of these gazelles, right? And then you've got a lion in the background. And the analogy I use is that, look, if you're the gazelle, right, you have information that is highly valuable on the black market, right? It's the stuff contained in your practice management system, your imaging systems, even your financial systems and documents. This is really valuable data. Data in our economy in 2020 is now more valuable than oil. It's why Facebook and Instagram and these companies are worth what they're worth. Data is incredibly valuable. But the good news is, and you can listen to a presentation like this or a webinar like this, and sometimes be like, they're coming for me. Like, can 2020 really suck anymore if it tried, right? And here's the thing. If you go back to that picture of the gazelles and the lion in the background, yeah, you're in the gazelles, but we don't have to make your system completely foolproof. All we have to do is to make you at the very front of the pack, so there's a whole bunch more attractive people. And there's a lot of people who are sticking their head in the sand saying, it can't happen to me. It won't happen to me. Now, the fact that you're actually on this webinar, the fact you're actually educating yourself, the fact that maybe you don't give your staff unrestricted access to Facebook, hint, hint, that's a terrible idea. If you can take practical steps, you're not going to be completely, there's no absolute foolproof way to prevent a cybersecurity attack. what we can do is make you statistically insignificant that it's going to happen to you by taking practical action steps and working with people who understand what they're doing. And so a little bit of encouragement there. Not everybody needs to freak out. It's not inevitable. It's not impossible, but it's not inevitable. And Gary and I, after Dr. Abel takes off, we'll go ahead and talk about some of those practical steps as well. So don't freak out. It doesn't have to happen to you.
Yeah, that's the point. You know, whenever we work with doctors, i.e. Dr. Abel and many of his other colleagues, and we do a ton of breaches, everyone kind of says the same thing, man, if I had just known, you know, that I needed to do something, I would have changed my mind, right? Because that's how people think, you know, and that's the purpose of these webinars, is to help you understand what the risk is. And there are things, as Bryan alluded to, that can make you a really, really difficult target. And then you can make a good decision. Maybe it's something you want to look into, or you might say, yeah, I think I'm okay. But now at least you have the information to make those decisions. And I think Dr. Abel would probably agree with me, you know, if he probably knew a little bit more ahead of time, you know, he may have gone down a different path. And that's the challenge, because, you know, that's, you know, I think that's the decision most people, they follow the path of least resistance, right? They're like, oh, I'm okay. I asked my IT company. I mean, Dr. Abel had a colleague, we did a breach out in Colorado, very similar attack methodology. They attacked the IT vendor. And the doctor actually brought the IT vendor into their office, five oral surgery practice, 5 oral surgeons, and brought him into the office and said, hey, I just got a letter from my malpractice carrier, you know, warning me that I need to enhance my cybersecurity. And instead of the IT vendor saying similar to what Bryan says, look, you know, I recommend you do this, the IT vendor convinced the 5 doctors that they're totally fine. 2 weeks later on Thanksgiving, they got hit, and they were down for 2 weeks. And that was with us on site. But they took out every single computer, you know, so I think that's the differential here. You know, you have a good IT vendor when they make the comments like Bryan made. You know, you have a struggle when you go to them and they're trying to assure you over and over again that you're fine. My recommendation is switch, right? Because they do not have your best interest in mind. And that's how we get to this place, right? And as you heard from Dr. Abel, it's not a good place. And the types of attacks, even since April when Dr. Abel was a victim, they're significantly more detrimental than they were back then. I mean, this is a cat and mouse game. Every time, you know, we come up with some type of countermeasure to beat them, they're spending money to figure it out, right? These criminals, they'll go out and buy the same firewalls, the same antivirus software, all these technologies that you have. What it takes is being the faster gazelle. And that's where companies like Bryan and I come in, where we understand what's really going on, right? We're working a breach today. The doctor had their IT vendor make a change to their network Thursday night. Saturday morning, they were the victim of a cyber attack, right? It's a small little GP office, but you know, they're in a world of hurt right now because of what happened. All their data is encrypted on all their machines. You know, and that's how fast it goes down. People don't understand. The hackers are running these tools on the internet, and they can scan tens of millions of IP addresses in minutes and hours, depending on their technology. And if they stumble across your network and it's not configured properly, you're going to get hit. And that's exactly what happened to this practice. We had a similar incident with a perio practice during the COVID pandemic. Also, the doctor took a laptop, put it online. It didn't have the latest patches. It was exposed. And literally 7 o'clock p.m. when he turned it on to 7 a.m. the next morning, his whole network was hit with ransomware. That's how fast it happens. This isn't like, oh, it's going to take months to find my computers. It's just not occurring that way anymore. So anyway, Dr. Abel, I don't want to keep you on here much longer. I know you have family obligations and probably a whole bunch of charts to write up. But
I'm efficient. I get all my charts done before I leave the office.
Okay.
Never fail.
Good man.
No, but I appreciate you again, you guys, you know, having me on and you know, letting me tell my story and everything. And I'll just kind of leave with this one thought, just to make sure, you know, people get a proper perspective of this, because after this happened to me and a lot of my colleagues and friends knew about it, another oral surgeon reached out to me and he presented me with this insurance plan to protect from cyber attacks. He's like, does this look good? You know, in lieu of what you went through, you know, I'm looking to up my coverage. And I said to him, I'm like, you're asking me the wrong question. You should ask me how to prevent this from happening, because that's going to be probably, I mean, it's certainly a worry, you know, for your coverage and the finances that you'd have to dish out for ransomware or whatnot. But you should be thinking about how to cover yourself. And that's where I was like, you need to call Black Talon or a similar company, you know, and certainly if you want to increase your insurance coverage, fine. But that's the wrong perspective to take, you know, because, you know, the way that I practice and the way that I live, you know, I don't know about everybody else, but my time is worth more and my comfort is worth more than almost anything. So my time with my family, my time with my practice, the way it flows, and, you know, having as few stresses and hiccups and speed bumps as we can. I'm not saying that I'm just okay to just let money fly out the window, but I'm going to do everything I can to prevent those things from happening, to interfere with how my life flows and how comfortable I am and everyone around me. And it takes a little bit, a very small amount of finances to protect yourself, because we do it all the time with, you know, with having an IT company at all and having our other vendors that help our practice run, because we can only do so much on our own. And that's where I told him, I'm like, you know, you need to look to protect yourself. And I'm definitely going to be out there being an advocate to making sure, you know, do everything in my power to change people's perspectives to make sure they can protect themselves. Because nobody wants this to happen to anybody, and the more it happens and the more the people that are vulnerable, this will propagate more, you know, occurrences, because they'll have the successes under their belt. They see it's working. They're business people too, you know, even though they're criminals, you know, they're business people and they want it. They want that return. So if they keep on seeing vulnerable people and people aren't protecting themselves, they're just going to keep doing it.
Yep. Well said.
That's it. But thank you so much. You know, enjoy the rest of the talk. And if anyone wants to send some chat questions over, I'll answer them later. Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Abel.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Dr.
it.
Y'all have a great night.
You
Bye.
too,
Yeah.
thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
So I think Doctor made some really good points about mitigating the risk. Can both of you kind of weigh in on what are some best practice reasonable measures that you can put in place proactively? Nobody wants ransomware. Nobody wants to be hit with this loss.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I'll take that, Brian, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please.
So I think Dr. Abel really nailed it. What I'm starting to see is people are offsetting their risk through insurance policies. And that is the absolute wrong approach. We tell every client, get insurance, okay? Because no company, and Brian said it, will guarantee anything, because you just can't. There's too many variables to control. As much as most of us are control freaks, right? We want to be realistic here and understand you just can't do that. So how do we mitigate risk? Well, we mitigate risk by implementing sound technology, you know, like Brian's firm, quality firewalls, quality antivirus software, patch management. You know, Brian uses really good remote management tools to keep your computers up to date. That's very important, right? Versus what we see in a lot of cases, people say, I have a good IT person. Well, what does that mean to you? That they can fix your printer when it doesn't print properly? Well, yes, that's important. I get that. But if you are using, like I saw today, free antivirus software, Windows 10 Home, they still had a Windows 7 computer on their network, that's two issues. One, the practice doesn't understand the risk, which, okay, maybe I could understand, but everyone knows Windows 7 is not HIPAA compliant at this point, right? It's kind of been beat into our mind, but it's also the fault of the IT vendor, right? They should be saying, hey, we want best class services for our clients. We want the best antivirus. We want the best backup, right? And technology. And Dr. Abel said it, most of the time, the price differential is not that much. But one thing that he didn't say is most of these cyber attacks result in fees in excess of $100,000. It's very rare, even for a very small GP practice, to walk away with expenses of less than 100K. The ransom, you heard it, the ransomware for him was 37,000. Okay, that's a little on the lower end of the average that we're seeing right now. So by the time you add up all your business interruption, which estimated to be 2 weeks, and then you add up fees for the mitigation and the ransomware payments and potential legal fees, I mean, you're looking easily at 100, and that's assuming no data was lost. The second data stolen or compromised, that number will approach $250,000 very quickly for a smaller office. And there are not too many practices that have that kind of money sitting around, and it's definitely a challenge. So implementing sound security measures with your IT firm or someone like Brian, and then layering in additional security measures that a cyber firm does, right? We bring in very, very sophisticated tools and technology that analyze your network and say, hey, here are the open doors and windows that hackers are going to use to gain access to your system. Let's literally shut those windows and deadbolt those doors, before they come knocking, because the reality is they're knocking. You have to understand that, okay? I'm on FBI and government briefings all the time, and that's one of the big things that I hear the agents say to us is like, people don't understand, these guys are pounding on your doors and windows all the time, and if you're not doing the right things, right, they're eventually going to be able to find their way in. And that's why it's important to have good technology in your practice. Saving a couple dollars here and there, that never works out. And Brian, you're in this more than I am with IT, and I think you would probably agree with me. You got to make the investment in your practice. And this is an area when this goes bad, because this is a whole part of our business, right, that a lot of people don't understand. When these things go bad, it's a really sad situation. I've literally had doctors tell me, I'm done. I'm closing my doors. I'm out. I can't afford this. You just never want to be in that position. And it's, but it is preventable. It absolutely is preventable. Nothing's 100%, but if you put best practices and best measures, like some of the things I'm talking about, like training your staff and vulnerability management and best in class firewalls and antivirus software and patch management, it will make a significant difference, in A, preventing you from having an attack, and B, if there is an attack, often it's minimized, and that's the differential there. So I hope I answered your question.
A couple of additional thoughts on this. First, let me talk, because I know there's a lot of Advantage Tech clients on this. First of all, thank you, because at some point my kids need to go to college, so we appreciate you sticking with us. When Gary talks about remote management, best-in-class firewalls and Wi-Fi, and enterprise-grade antivirus, I want to just reassure all of you, all of those things are part of the IT management platform that we provide. They're not optional. To this point, I think we're the only IT company that I've ever found where it's like, we don't even sell firewalls. You're getting all of this stuff. It's part of it. We don't charge extra for it. It just is. And that's part of the reason we've not had a breach, is because we're very insistent on what we would define as the standard of care. So from a basic IT security standpoint, we're really working with you to do a good job with that. Secondly, we're working with Black Talon to make sure that our systems are really up to date, that we're updated. Believe me, the Advantage Tech systems are hardened significantly more than our clients are. Because here's the thing: if somebody gets into one office, one client, okay, we can mitigate that, we can survive that. If they breach Advantage Tech and get to all of them, that's a national news style event with the number of clients and the impact that would be. So we do extra things like, when you log into your bank from a new computer and it's a pain in the butt the first time, they have to send you the two-factor code and everything like that. For our guys, for example, the system we use to log into your systems to manage them, every single day when they sit down in the morning, they have to do that two-factor. When they come back from lunch, they have to do that two-factor because it expires after 4 hours, or it expires if they leave the system for, I think, more than 30 minutes. So we are incredibly locked down to protect you. Yes, some of these things are a bit inconvenient, but they're worth it. And so talking about some of the real practical things that you can do with your staff, number one, no personal email at work. For anybody, stay off personal email. Number two, if you're an Advantage Tech client, you have a guest Wi-Fi. Everyone has one. Personal cell phones, tablets, etc., they go on the guest Wi-Fi. The only thing that should be on your internal Wi-Fi is something that needs to have access to your practice management and imaging system. If it doesn't need that access, it needs to be on the guest Wi-Fi, period. And number three, and this is a big one, especially in this incredible year we're living in, many of you, we use GoToMyPC Corporate Edition. It's secured, it's encrypted, it's a safe way to remote in and basically do everything in the practice. There are a million tools out there that will let you remotely access your computer. That is a nightmare. Just don't go down that road. I think Gary would say that's probably one of the number one ways. When he talks about people knocking on the door, that's what they're doing. They're looking for those free remote access tools because guess what? They know exactly how they work. They're really easy to bypass the security on those. You don't want that headache. And the other thing that I would mention from a practical standpoint is talk to your staff. I mean, really talk to your team. Yes, you want to do cybersecurity training with them. I think that's really important. I think it's also required by HIPAA, although I'm not 100% sure on that. It is, okay. But I will tell you that one conversation is worth 1,000 firewalls, because you can't out-engineer human stupidity sometimes. I hate to say it that way, but if you've never had a conversation with your staff about, look, it is not okay and appropriate for you to be on Facebook on your computer. It is not okay or appropriate for you to be checking your Yahoo mail. It is not okay or appropriate for you to be on LinkedIn in an operatory. LinkedIn's a special pet peeve of mine, because now you're paying people to put your system at risk while looking for a job better than the one that you're currently paying for them to not do in the first place. So that one just bothers me especially. You know, in a lot of cases, we can shut these things down where they just can't get to Instagram from your computers. Those are some practical things, but so much of this is about having a conversation with your staff and really just being open with them that, hey, it's not okay. This is not the Wild West. The cybersecurity differences or risks are significantly different than they were just a few years ago. You know, a few years ago, the big thing was I got hacked and they crashed my system and they gave me a virus. Okay, and that evolved now into this, I got hacked and have ransomware, and I now have to pay all this money to get access to my data again. And now this has evolved even further to, now I've got hacked and they want the ransom, and if I don't pay the ransom, not only am I not going to have access to my information, but they're going to publish my information out on the dark web. And that's where things get really dicey. And Gary, I want to pivot and ask you a question. I have my own opinions, but I'll wait for you on this one.
Sure.
There's a big push right now where particularly people who are selling such services are saying, hey, there's a silver bullet for all of this. All you have to do is go to the cloud. Change your practice management to this, and all of your cybersecurity worries go away. Is that true? If so, why? If not, why not? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Okay. Yeah. Look, I think it's a fantastic question. We did not plan this in any way, so full disclosure. So,
right.
Look, you kind of heard my history a little bit. I built one of the very first healthcare technologies in the cloud in the year 1999, and we had thousands of people running your cloud. And cyber back then was a thing, but it was a fraction of where we are today. Okay. And it was kind of the cool thing at the time, and people were like, oh, I don't need a server anymore, I go to the cloud, and it was very viable. Let's fast forward to today. There are plenty of major cloud technologies that have been hit by ransomware, okay, and other types of cyber events. You have to understand one really important thing here. The criminals follow the dollars, okay? So there are small, easy to hit targets, okay, i.e. dental practices or small, medium businesses. Those are easy targets, okay? Then there are hard targets. You're talking Fortune 500 companies, you're talking cloud providers, etc. But the payoff is typically huge. If you look at even some of the corporate hits, Garmin GPS, Canon, Konica Minolta, Samsung, Honda Motor Corp, these were 7+ figure ransom demands. You're talking millions and millions of dollars. Was there a lot of work to get into these systems? Probably, okay? But what am I seeing now? I'm seeing exactly what Bryan said. I'm gonna shift all my risk and throw my data in the cloud, and if something happens, it's on them. It doesn't work that way. It absolutely does not. It is your data, you own the data. If your cloud provider gets breached and your patient records are exposed, you can go fight it out in court with them, but under the HIPAA laws, it's your breach, okay? Yep. So I think cloud has a place, and I'm not saying that cloud is horrible and you should all run away from it. That's not the point here.
No, not at all.
You have to understand what's going on here. I mean, a major cloud healthcare dental provider got hit last week. They publicly announced it, okay? Yep. The reality is anyone can be a victim. You can do the right things and you can be a victim. You can do the wrong things and not become a victim, and kind of everything's, you know, in between those, to be honest. But you also have to understand you have local risk. if you don't put any money into security because you're in the cloud, what you're going to find out is that you're going to walk into your office and find all of your computers encrypted with ransomware. Then I say, now what? What are you going to do? Can you take an X-ray? Can you take a 3D image? Can you take
Right.
photographs? Can you access your scheduler? Oh, well, I have my cell phone. I can log into cloud this way, or we have an old laptop. We'll fire that up. Well, you really can't function as a practice. Maybe, right? Maybe you're a little bit better, but that's an issue. And what if malicious code gets on your computers that steals your credentials to your cloud solution?
That's a big one that we've seen.
This is huge. You have to understand what's going on right now. If you've been following the news in the last, it was kind of pre-released late last week, but mainstream news is just picking it up. US Cyber Command, which is an operational division of our military, in conjunction with Microsoft, took out a huge operation, what is typically known as a Russian operation. This threat group had access to 500,000 US computers. They launched an offensive attack against this operation. As far as I know, this is the first time in United States history where a private organization in conjunction with a military organization teamed up and did something. And the backstory is that this operation was going to be used for election interference. Okay, but here's the other unfortunate thing. When you get these viruses on your computer, right? These 500,000 computers that have this virus on the computer, they talk back to the threat group's servers. They're called command and control servers. And these servers can be programmed to do anything. They're like, oh, let's launch this ransomware attack against 500,000 computers. Boom, they launch the attack. Let's deliver, this code that steals every single username and password that employees type into their computers. Boom, they start.
That's the big one.
It is an utter nightmare. So what I challenge you to think about is this: what if someone stole your username and password to your cloud technology? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? I mean, they'll log in as you, and that's what we have to think about. So, yes, there are good things and there's bad things about any type of technology, but it's important to understand that if you're being sold a bill of goods that you have no risk, it's just not an accurate statement. There's been plenty of cloud providers in healthcare, outside of healthcare that have been hit, and their customers are impacted. Think about all the websites. And I think, Brian, one of the things we should talk about is what everyone's like, well, it's in the cloud, but you got to understand what the cloud is. It's a bunch of servers in data centers connected to the internet. I mean, that's
somebody else's server. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a server. It's not like this, magical pink unicorn that runs around and no one can catch it. I know it sounds ridiculous, but in people's minds, they're like, oh, it's in the cloud, I'm fine. Like it's hard to rationalize and understand what that really means. I think it's important to understand that, and then make good decisions. There are practices that can benefit from the cloud, but you have to understand the risks also. And they have big targets. So I think that's where I was going here is the money follows the data, right? And it's not hard to figure out who these people are. You think hacking groups don't know who the bigger dental companies are with tens of millions or even probably more than that number of patient records in their systems. Think of the ransom demand that could be garnered from that type of attack, bigger than most hospital systems. So especially systems that host data on specialty practices. I mean, if you look at the amount of data in a specialty practice versus a GP, it's usually tenfold the number of patients. So hopefully that addresses that.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does, and it very much mirrors what I said. Look, cloud technology absolutely has its place. Look, Advantage Tech has engineers and people in eight different states. We use cloud technology heavily because we're geographically distributed. Not everybody works in our operations center in Michigan, so we use it heavily, but we use it responsibly. I think my thing to people is always, look, cloud makes a lot of sense in a lot of scenarios, and it doesn't make sense in some scenarios. Like you don't want to try and put your CTs up in the cloud for various reasons, right? Your practice management, it may or may not make sense depending on your scenario. Public cloud, private cloud, there's all sorts of options. What's really important is that you don't just believe the marketing hype of, oh, the cloud is the be all end all to everything. That's just not accurate. It comes with its own benefits and risks, just like every other technology. So that's a great great thing. Laura, did we have questions that you wanted to get to?
I have a list.
Okay.
Not trying to interrupt too much.
I
So,
want you to jump on those.
Throw 'em at us.
so, you guys are talking about some different components and apps and things like that. So I have some things that are centered around that. So one is, if I'm using Dropbox to share and store files, how vulnerable are those files? Is Dropbox a secure application?
I can grab that.
Go
Brian.
ahead, Gary.
Yeah. So there's a couple things to consider. First, are you using the free version or the paid version? And then second, you have to sign, if you're sharing any type of patient data, you must sign a business associates agreement with Dropbox, and that's only available through the business version. And it's not expensive, but you need to do that. Security is often up to you. Is Dropbox secure? Sure, they're a good company. They have an unbelievable amount of data in their cloud, and they do good things. But if your own hygiene, meaning your own security hygiene, is poor, you're going to become a victim. One thing that Brian was talking about is some of these preventative measures. And one thing that could result in a breach in your Dropbox is the reusing of passwords. If you use a password on a website that's hacked, you got to understand they're going to take your username and password and try and stuff it into a company like Dropbox or American Express or Amazon, right? Why? Because we don't think that they're going to take that password and try and log into other websites. And it's exactly what the hacking groups are doing. And to that point, I want to share a really, really interesting story with you that just occurred. Actually, Brian, probably not too far from where you live, as a matter of fact. But we had a specialist contact us about 3 weeks ago, and they said, we got a crazy situation going on here. Our patients are receiving extremely inappropriate text messages from our office. And he's like, I don't understand this. I'm like, okay, that's an interesting one. Let's try and figure this out. So without going into all the technical details, I'll explain the scenario to you. Patients would pull up in the parking lot and they would text the practice the fact that they are sitting in the parking lot wanting to come in. Within seconds of sending that text message out to the practice, they would start receiving highly inappropriate messages on their cell phones. Now, the first patient that told the doctor about this, doctor's like, we can't have anything to do with that. It's not us. And then 4 patients came in, said the same thing, and he's like, we have a problem, right? He was smart enough to realize something's going on here. So upon a thorough investigation, it was determined that the hackers hacked their voice over IP telephone system, set up auto-responding messages that delivered all these inappropriate messages back to the patients. And the reason they got hacked was because when we did our investigation, we asked them, did you use a password on any other website? And when they answered yes, we found that website had actually been hacked. And people are like, well, why would they figure out my phone system? Well, the phone system you use is the same phone system hundreds of thousands or millions of businesses use. So you're an easy target that way. And the bad thing for this practice was a lot of these inappropriate messages went back to minors, okay, because they were in the business of treating children. So it was a major PR disaster for this practice. And obviously that stuff ends up on Facebook. You won't believe this. I went to Dr. Mary Smith, and this is what happened. I will never go back to that doctor again. To Brian's point, was this 100% preventable? I will say it's probably 99.9% preventable, because they did not use best practices, which is don't reshare passwords. Okay.
So let me show you guys something real quick. I'm going to do a screen share. Laura, if you can enable that. We weren't doing this, so this is ad hoc. So if it doesn't work exactly how it's supposed to, you'll have to bear with me. Laura's now panicking trying to do that. But let's do, just for the fun of it, let's do a real-time dark web scan. You've heard Gary talk about the dark web. Let's go ahead and actually do a live data search on this. So Laura, if you can tell me once you guys can see my screen.
Yep, we got you.
So this is something we do for our clients. This is kind of interesting. And then it's a question of who do we want to pick on? We can't pick on Black Talon because they're going to be squeaky clean. And if not, it's going to look really bad for Gary. So let's just pick on the ADA. So all I'm going to do is go in here and say, show me, and this is a tool we use for our clients. I'm going to just do a dark web search for the ADA. And it's going to take just a minute to come up, and it may come up with nothing. Maybe the ADA is squeaky clean, but we'll find out. I did this at Chicago Midwinter last year, and for Chicago, I did the CDS, and it was funny because immediately after my presentation at CDS, I had 2 members who were on the governing authority at the CDS that said, hey, wait a minute, how did you get that password? Because I highlight it. Now, most of their passwords here are, so we've got, let's take hall@ada.org. I can go through, Mark@ada.org uses a password. Danny, so this is probably a kid. This is Owens at ADA. So this is what, now you'll see these are what's called hashed, which means they're stored in the system as this numeric code. I can decrypt that and then get their actual password, but there's really no reason to do that. What you're seeing here is for the ADA, we have over 1,000 breached records at the ADA. And for this one right here, Salmanola at ada.org, I also have their last name, address, city, state, and zip. And this information is for sale on the dark web. Now, what does this mean? Well, what Gary's talking about here, like we have Bradley, he's got a password of Brad. Williams has a password of Leslie, probably his wife or girlfriend or mistress, I don't know. And what you can do is then we can get this full password. I can click 3 buttons and get it. And I can then, using this email address and this password, I can log in, and one of the first things I'm going to try is whatever the webmail interface is to ada.org. So I can now read his email. And then I'll go try Dropbox, and I'll try Chase, and I'll try whatever systems, there's an automated bot that Gary was talking about, that command and control, that will take those credentials and just scour the internet and log in as many places as I can, as rapidly as I can. So when you talk about the dark web, this is exactly what we are talking about. All of this information for over 1,000 breaches for the ADA. This one's really creative. Brian Johnson at ada.org, his password was matthew.is.george@gmail.com. So there's all sorts of fun stuff you look at when you see these. This is why you never reuse passwords. Because if one of these sites was breached and you reused this password multiple times, they can now get into everywhere where you've reused that password. And by the way, in the spirit of let he who is without sin cast the first stone, I have 3 degrees in IT, and I run an IT company for 20 years, and I have to confess I still do this sometimes. So get a nice password manager like Dashlane or something like that that can help you generate random passwords for every site. But when Gary talks about like what is your own hygiene, this is a great example. Because if you reuse your passwords, they're out there on the dark web for sale. And if you used it 10 places, if they buy this list, and they do buy these lists all the time, they're going to use it and hit everywhere they can.
Yep. So Brian was talking about data consolidation, kind of on the other side in the world we operate in. The hackers do the same thing. They will consolidate this data. There's hundreds of millions of stolen credentials available for sale right now, and that's a big challenge. And then there's the dark web component of this, which we do another presentation, I'd be open to showing you, but where they sell your data, your actual patient data. I just recently did a presentation where I showed an actual dental practice's data for sale on the dark web. No joke. Yep. This just happened middle of September. This is not something that happened years ago. So but password managers, Brian, great tool to implement, and you can get free ones. You don't have to get the corporate edition, but it's something you should implement in your personal lives as well as for your practice. And the other nice thing is if you have a password manager and you control access to it, if you have team members that leave or are terminated, they don't know the password to the Blue Cross Blue Shield website of Michigan that they log in and check claims on. So you have some controls there, and people don't think about that. So anyway,
Laura, we have 1 minute for the other 84 questions.
I'm going to corral you guys. Yep, I'm going to corral you guys.
I'm sorry, that's just way too cool to not do.
This is the speed round.
All right, let's do it.
So is GoToMyPC an acceptable remote access vehicle?
For the corporate edition, if you get it like through Advantage Tech or through your IT company, yes, it's fully encrypted, secured, and Advantage Tech has a business associate agreement with them. So yes.
Is it possible to get your recommendation for a top on-site backup option, in your opinion?
The best option for an on-site backup is what we call a BDR. I think Gary would probably agree with this. It actually makes a copy of all the information on your server every hour. If your main server goes down, this can take over. It also sends a backup to the cloud every night, so you have multiple snapshots spread across time. For an on-site backup, it's kind of become the standard of care.
Okay. So one question that came in earlier when right after Dr. Abel finished talking was, how fast are these events growing? And with it, are insurance costs growing as well?
Yeah.
Gary, you can speak to that one.
Yeah, I'll grab that. So during COVID, there was approximately a 300% increase in attacks against healthcare because of certain types of events, people working remotely, turning on remote access, as Bryan alluded to, et cetera. I think what's going to start happening, based on knowledge that I have, is 2019, these insurance companies were upside down pretty hard with paying out claims for ransomware. Insurance has been what I will call relatively cheap up to this point. You know, $1 million coverage for a smaller practice can be had for under $1,000. I think those days are going to go away pretty soon. There are some insurance companies that are exiting the cybersecurity insurance space because there's way too much risk. The risk wasn't there years ago, as Bryan alluded to. It has escalated to the point where you can't turn on the news anymore and not hear about some major organization. If you think about it, they do a $7 to $8 million hit on one company. That puts a pretty significant dent in that insurance company, just that one hit. Now you multiply that times hundreds of events on larger companies, and then you add up all the smaller ones. I think you're going to see more and more companies exiting the cybersecurity insurance space, or the premiums are going to go through the roof, and they're going to start requiring proof of cyber technologies in place to mitigate and offset their risk. But it's going to get, you mark my words, it's going to, in the next 12 months, it's going to get ugly in that space. I'm still saying you should have insurance. I think it's invaluable, but in the end, the insurance companies want to make money. And if they're losing money paying out all these claims, that's an issue. The other problem is everyone starts increasing their limits, and the hackers start increasing their limits. They're chasing the insurance. $5,000 a couple of years ago, that was about average. I would love to see $5,000 ransomware payments now instead of the $40,000. In a year from now, the $40,000 might become $65,000, $70,000, $100,000 average payment because everyone's running out and buying insurance. You cannot, and we said this before, it's very important, you cannot offset your risk with insurance.
Yep.
So.
Yep. I will tell you, just as from anecdotal evidence, Advantage Tech has never had any sort of breach or insurance incident where we've cost our insurance company everything. My insurance was up 30% this year. And in order to get it, we had to complete a 24-page questionnaire because I actually talked to my broker and I said, how are a lot of IT companies doing this? I said, we're kind of leading on this, and this is really stretching our capabilities. And he said, you're seeing two things. A lot of them are just saying, I'm just not going to do anything in healthcare. Or B, you're seeing a lot of them who are simply just going without insurance and saying, if my clients get hit, I'm out of business. Oh well. And that's so. I think a very important thing is not only do you need to look at your insurance, but your IT company must show you that they have cybersecurity insurance for them, naming their clients as additional insured. And I got to tell you, we couldn't get ours if we weren't working with somebody like Gary and his team. They would not write a policy for us without an independent external audit. So when somebody says, oh yeah, we'll handle all your penetration testing and we do it on ourselves and everything like that, that should be a red flag right from the beginning.
And I want to reiterate something that Bryan said, because I saw this personally firsthand. An IT vendor was attacked. They had a relatively large insurance policy, Bryan. But you know what? They never disclosed to the insurance company that they were storing patient records in their backup, meaning the IT vendor was holding data. The insurance company paid this much on a multi-million-dollar policy because they filled out the application wrong. Or whether it was maliciously done or accidental, I'm hoping it was accidental, they ended up with zero coverage and their client suffered in the end because of their mistake. So we have to understand that the world that we live in is very, very detail oriented, and you hear some of the things that Bryan is saying, and that's important to understand. You have to ask your IT company that question.
So Debbie Carr was on our webinar earlier. She had to jump off. but of course she is HIPAA, all things HIPAA. Her question, statement here was: the Treasury Department has recently ruled that paying the ransom can result in antitrust violations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to speak to that?
This is a real problem. The challenge for us is if we're then asked to help pay the ransom, technically that is now Advantage Tech can get in trouble for. And the reason is because, as Gary said, this is a race to follow the money, and it's spreading so rapidly and becoming so out of control that basically they're saying, hey, we're getting to a point you cannot pay the ransom. That's where we're ultimately headed, because this is not sustainable. It puts companies like ours, fortunately, we've never had to deal with this. We've never had to deal with this, and I hope and pray we never will. But it does put us in a precarious spot where if somebody were to ask, hey, we have had clients come to us who are not current clients, but people who are in the middle of this situation saying, hey, can you help? There's now a lot of discussion amongst, IT companies of a good caliber saying, are we putting ourselves at risk by assisting people in paying the ransom because we can run afoul of some governance? Gary, I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, we're in discussions with it as well. I mean, I've been on the phone with various government agencies about it, and let's kind of understand what we're talking about to level the playing field. You get hit with a ransomware attack. They're asking you to pay $50,000, right? A company like ours would convert that into your money into Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and transfer it to the threat group. The issue is, because it's an anonymous transaction, you don't know who you're sending this money to. What if you, as a practice, just transferred $50,000 to North Korea?
Right.
You violated technically federal law.
And you probably did.
Yeah, look.
Or Russia or China.
I mean, if you think about the amount of money we've transferred in the last 12 months, it's insane for ransom payments. The challenge is here, I understand what the government is doing, okay? And Bryan is right. At some point, it has to stop. But I don't think it ever will, per se, because what does a business do, right? And that's what I've said on some of my briefings with agencies. What do you expect our clients to do? Tell us. If you're looking at a healthcare provider about to lose their entire patient database and all their x-rays and HIPAA violations, they have no choice. Like, tell us what you expect. And then there's the hemming and the hawing. Well, if you work with the FBI or you work with this agency, that'll be taken into consideration, right? And you can look these articles up. This is public information, So it's a very significant challenge right now. A whole nother reason that you never want to put yourself in this situation. What if all of a sudden something comes down the pipe where the government's like, absolutely not. Department of Justice will prosecute you if you pay a ransom demand. What are you going to do? That's a really bad situation. I'm not saying that's definitely what's going to happen, but at some point we know what happens when industries don't self-regulate and fix the problem, right? And offset their risk with insurance versus stopping the attack to begin with. This is what's going to be the outcome here. You're going to have no insurance anymore, because what are you going to have the insurance for? They're not going to pay the ransom. So these companies are going to go out, and then you're going to have an issue with, oh my gosh, I'm not allowed to pay this ransom. Now what? So critically think about that for a second. What are you going to do? So more and more important, take the money and invest in proper security, and don't put yourself in this position to begin with. I can't reiterate this enough. This stuff is almost totally preventable. There's never been a cyber attack that we've dealt with that wasn't actually preventable. And that's a key takeaway, right? That's really important for everyone on this call to understand. You can do something. If you're just going to be like, I can't even deal with this, I'm the doctor, I don't want to even think about this, you have to now, right? It's no different than a lot of the changes in HR and all the other regulations you deal with as a provider. This is the business we're in, right? We're all in. We have to understand risk, and you have to take precautions to prevent it. No different than you having malpractice. You don't want to ever have a malpractice claim, but you have insurance for it. Mitigate the risk with cyber by using good technology. All right, I think I went a little over there, but go ahead.
It's an important point. Going back to what I said at the beginning, we're not going to make everything bulletproof. We just want to make sure you're the gazelle at the front of the pack. We don't want to make you impregnable. We just want to make you insignificant.
Great. I think that is probably about it. There was, I think you kind of spoke to this, but just in case you wanted to add something, One of the questions was, what do you say to doctors who say, oh, I'm just a small town dentist. They will never find me.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I want to be realistic. I want people to be wise. There are plenty of scenarios where you look at it and the impact or the risk factor is really small. There's a bunch of variables that we'll look at, and depending on those variables, we may be like, you know what? Yeah, you don't need advanced cybersecurity tools. Or we may look at it and say, yeah, no, you really should have some advanced cybersecurity tools in place, like what Black Talon offers. What's important is that the conversation is had, and that you educate yourself on what those are, what those factors are. Hiding behind, I'm all on the cloud, or my practice is so small it doesn't matter. That may be true. It may not be true. You owe it to yourself, to your practice, and to your patients to find out and have that conversation.
Right. You know what? We see the full spectrum of ransomware attacks. Everything from a small single provider office with a half dozen computers to businesses with hundreds of computers. And I agree with Bryan. There sometimes is no rhyme or reason. And some practices tried to do the right thing in their victims, but I will tell you, in a majority of these cases, they haven't really done anything, right? They've not assessed their risk. And if you want to talk, HIPAA or any type of compliance related to cyber, you have to start with understanding where you have risk. And that's Bryan's point. If I asked every single person on this call right now, have you done a risk assessment? Do you understand where you can be breached, how you can be breached? Do you have proper backups? Can you recover those backups? Most practices will say, I think I do, or I think I know. But how many people honestly on this call can sit back and be like, I went through all this, we're great. Maybe they had a good IT company that walked them through a couple of these things. Maybe they've worked with some HIPAA consultants that have given them these concepts, but you have to do the technical tests. That's a big thing. Filling out a form that says you're doing a risk assessment, okay, that's interesting, but what does that really do? Running tests against your firewall and running tests against your computers to understand whether these firewalls are configured properly, whether the computers are configured properly, that's effective, okay? That immediately tells you, whoa, we have a major problem here, or we're good. At this point in time when the tests were run, we're good. It doesn't mean in 3 months from now you're good, but at least you have a point in time, which is better than nothing. And that's really what putting up a defensive posture is all about. A cybersecurity solution, whether it's basic or advanced, it has to be a continuous process. Because if you look at what's going on right now, every day, literally every day, some new threat group, some new hacker figures out a way to break into a computer, whether it's Windows or Mac, I don't care. They're gonna do this. There's billions of dollars being generated every year from these attacks. It's not going to disappear overnight by government intervention or lack thereof. It's going to disappear by people actually taking proactive measures. And then again, it's never going to be completely gone. This is the world. This is our future, and everyone has to understand that. And if you want to be successful in practice and not have these type of issues, you have to do something. And that's firsthand experience dealing with your colleagues all over the country. There are thousands of Dr. Abels across the US. Okay, if you look at just 3 of the most recent attacks that took out dental practices, there's 1,000 just there alone. And then add up all the individual ones that don't make CNN and Fox News. I would argue it's probably tenfold. So anyway, I know we're over. So thank you. I do want to say thank you so much, Advantage Tech. I truly, truly hope if someone, everyone learned from this, and you can make good decisions now for your practice. And that's it. Have a good night, everyone.
Very good. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate you facilitating this, and thank you everybody for showing up. Hopefully, as Gary said, you did get some value out of it and had a little bit of fun at the same time. And keep the dad jokes coming for those of us that are trying to torture our teenagers. And here's to getting out of 2020.